Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, December 30th, 2025. A New York City mayor-elect, Zohran Mamdani, announces new members of his incoming administration, including Deputy Mayor for Health and Human Services, and he talks about working with and maybe clashing with the Trump administration. States begin to receive the first allotments from a $50 billion federal rural health care fund. The federal investigation into alleged multi-billion-dollar fraud of Minnesota State Services expands, with some Republicans in the state calling for Democratic Governor Tim Walz to resign. We'll talk about it with Axios reporter Herb Scribner. U.S. pledges $2 billion for United Nations humanitarian aid. That's down sharply from previous years. China's foreign minister criticizes a record $11 billion in U.S. weapon sales to Taiwan as China conducts military drills around the island, simulating a blockade. And more performers cancel scheduled dates at the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington, D.C., after President Trump's name was added to the institution. New York Times writes as hundreds of thousands of people amass in Times Square for the annual New Year's Eve ball drop, a much smaller gathering of historical importance will begin underground at a long-abandoned subway station. Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani will be sworn into office at the old City Hall subway station. Its tiled arches, chandeliers, and vaulted ceilings emblematic of a Gilded Age civic ambition that Mr. Mamdani is seeking to honor in spirit. That was the New York Times article. Today, the mayor-elect, a Democrat, named more members of his incoming administration.
The great W.E.B. Du Bois once said, "We should measure the prosperity of a nation not by the number of millionaires, but by the absence of poverty and the prevalence of health." By that measurement, our city is anything but prosperous. Too many of our fellow New Yorkers live lives of poverty and suffering, and too many others live lives where health is nothing more than a rumor of something they cannot afford. When I take office in 2 days, I seek to change not only the measure of the well-being of those who live in our city, but those also tasked with the work of measuring. We are here today at Elmhurst Hospital, which serves over 1 million patients annually, and so often feels the pain of poverty and ill health more acutely than anywhere else in our city. If anyone should hold the public's trust in the work of transforming a healthcare system full of disparities and fighting for New Yorkers who most need the services our city can provide, it is the leader who has guided this institution through moments of adversity and success. I am proud to announce that Helen Arteaga will serve as my Deputy Mayor of Health and Human Services. Helen has served as CEO of New York City Health and Hospitals Elmhurst since February of 2021, the same hospital that saved her and so many other New Yorkers' lives during COVID. Her tenure has been transformative, with the hospital delivering consistent improvements in care to its patients and making historic strides to support its frontline healthcare workers. It's the kind of leadership that Elmhurst residents came to expect from a daughter of the community, someone who grew up like them, cared about people like them, and understood that New Yorkers with less are often treated with less. That leadership, driven by empathy and guided by an unshakable belief that every New Yorker deserves a life of dignity, is no less than what the people of this city will expect from their new deputy mayor. As Deputy Mayor for Health and Human Services, Helen will have incredible power to make our city healthier and more prosperous.
New York City Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani at today's announcement in the city. He also named Ramzi Qasim, a law professor at City University of New York, as his chief counsel, and Stephen Banks, who was former Mayor Bill de Blasio's homeless services director, as corporation counsel. New York Post writing that Banks notably battled the current administration, that would be the Eric Adams administration, in court when it tried to roll back portions of right-to-shelter rules to deal with the migrant crisis. After the opening statements at today's news conference, the mayor-elect answered reporters' questions, including about working with the federal Trump administration.
Mayor-elect, this constellation of advisors seems like it could really be at the intersection of potentially combating efforts from the Trump administration, from beefing up the law department to prevent deportations, as you've mentioned, to pending SNAP and other benefit cuts. Have you had kind of a conversation with this cohort about the approach to the Trump administration, and what are your first few initial actions you're going to take relative to these top advisors and what you're instructing them to do relative to the Trump administration?
Well, I think it all comes back to the welfare of New Yorkers. And what I am so excited by, frankly, in each and every one of these appointments are New Yorkers who are committed to not only protecting those who call this city home in terms of their rights and their freedoms, but also in terms of their ability to find care in a city where too often healthcare is something that is synonymous with being something that is unaffordable. And I think that even in my own conversations with the president directly, I will always and have made the case for this city. I look forward to my top staff doing the same.
But is it that you would first pick up the phone and call the president if you didn't get along okay? These guys go at him? Is that kind of the approach?
I will look to have a conversation with anyone and everyone. And also, I think it's important that there are fights and freedoms that will be protected in conversations. There are fights and freedoms that will be protected in court. There are a number of active court cases, frankly, that I look forward to working on with my nominated corporations counsel to ensure that our actions as a city are furthering the protection of the rights of the people who call it home.
New York City Mayor-elect Democrat Zohran Mamdani today in New York City. He'll be sworn in New Year's Eve as midnight rolls into 2026, joined by New York City Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, also a Democrat, and Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont. New York City also one of the hubs of New Year's Eve celebrations in the United States, and C-SPAN will have live coverage from Times Square starting at 6 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday. Politico writes that the Trump administration on Monday doled out billions to states from a fund Congress created to, quote, transform rural health care. The funds, however, will be lavished more generously on small states and states that adopt administration-friendly policies. Again, reporting from Politico. Dr. Mehmet Oz, administrator of CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, announced the disbursement in a video.
Today's the day where 50 states are going to find out exactly how much money they're getting from the Rural Health Transformation Fund, this massive $50 billion that the president and Congress are giving to our governors, and every state applied, and every state's going to get money. But how much money, you'll find out today. But here's the story. If you're out there as a practicing physician, a hospital, a patient, the money is given today with the belief that you can deliver on what you promised us. But it's given over 5 years. So over time, we're going to innovate and iterate and make the system work even better. We already have so many brilliant ideas, from drones delivering medications to people being able to practice at the height of their licensure, like nurses and pharmacists, to robotic systems to allow us to ultrasound moms who have babies or in their belly, but they're in remote areas. Wonderful concepts. But every year, we're going to audit the system, and we're going to ask you to do even better than the year before. And for the folks who do a great job, they're going to get even more money. And the folks who don't deliver what they promised, they might get some money taken away from them to give to the guys who are doing a great job. So this is a competition. America loves a competition. It's going to continue for 5 years. Our hope is that we all get healthier in America and no longer will allow zip code dictate our life expectancy.
CMS Administrator Dr. Mehmet Oz in a video posted Monday. More from the Politico article. Over the next 5 years, half of the $50 billion Rural Health Transformation Fund will be distributed evenly among states, meaning Texas and California will receive far less per person than states with tiny populations. Leaders of those smaller states on both sides of the aisle are defending that setup. Divvying up the money according to state population size, they argue, would have screwed them over. The U.S. health system generally pays according to the number of patients a doctor or hospital sees or the number of services they provide. But tiny rural clinics and hospitals don't get the volume of patients needed to keep the lights on under such a formula. Again, that was from a Politico article. Another article at Politico reads at least a dozen states are working to shield people from soaring health insurance costs following Congress's failure to extend Obamacare subsidies for tens of millions of Americans. The efforts, which include actions taken by state leaders in California, Colorado, and Maryland, in nearly every case come with a major caveat. They'll only be able to help a portion of the people whose health insurance will be too expensive without the enhanced subsidies that Congress opted not to renew before leaving Washington for the year. That was from Politico. The House will be voting to extend those subsidies, however, next week, thanks to a bipartisan discharge petition that is forcing the bill to the floor over the objections of the House Republican leadership. Congressman Seth Magaziner, Democrat from Rhode Island, previewed the vote in a video posted this week.
Mark your calendars for January 6th. We have been fighting for months to extend funding for the Affordable Care Act so that people's health insurance costs don't skyrocket. And Republicans in Congress have been doing everything they can to let that funding expire, even though they know that it's going to make health care even less affordable for the American people. But finally, we were able to get 4 Republicans in the House to join all of the Democrats to sign a discharge petition which will force a vote in the House on extending the Affordable Care Act tax credits. And now, under the House rules, the Speaker has to have that vote no later than January 6th. We need a big result here. We need not just those 4 Republicans to help us get this bill through the House, but ideally many more Republicans so that we can then put pressure on the Senate and on Trump to just get this done. The Trump administration is doing everything that it can to make life more expensive for working people. Donald Trump has put these tariffs into place that are raising the cost of everything. He's blocking clean energy projects from getting to the grid, which is raising the cost of energy, and now trying to block the extension of the Affordable Care Act tax credits. But if we win on January 6th and we pass this extension by a large margin, it is going to put the pressure on the Senate and on the White House to do the right thing, extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits so that people's costs don't spike even more than they already have.
Congressman Seth Magaziner, Democrat from Rhode Island, posted a video on Monday. And when the House returns to session, you can always follow it live, gavel to gavel, on C-SPAN television and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. A West Health Gallup survey released in November found that 47% of American adults say they are worried they don't have enough money to afford health care in 2026. It's the highest level since the survey began tracking that question in 2021. This is Washington Today. Fox News writes that federal authorities are launching a, quote, massive operation in Minnesota on Tuesday to, again, quote, identify, arrest, and remove criminals who are defrauding the American people, the Department of Homeland Security said. They wrote on X, our investigative agents are conducting a massive operation to identify, arrest, and remove criminals who are defrauding the American people. We will root out this rampant fraud plaguing Minnesota. The article says the DHS announcement came a day after the department said it had launched an operation to investigate fraud in the city of Minneapolis after the release of a video by an independent journalist that questioned daycare center operations in the area. Reporting from Fox News. Minnesota House Speaker Lisa Demuth and Floor Leader Harry Niska, both Republicans, held a virtual news conference on Monday about the fraud allegations. A reporter asked about a group of Minnesota House Republicans, other than them, calling on Governor Tim Walz, a Democrat, to resign.
Gorham?
I'm wondering if either Leader Niska or Speaker Demuth could just comment on a couple of members of the Republican caucus calling for the governor to resign over these recent developments. Is that something you guys agree with? Is that something you feel is not necessary to that full extent?
Thanks for the question, Quinn. There's almost $9 billion of suspected fraud. Much of that is actually proven and there's been convictions. To have a governor in his second term that has allowed this to go on under his watch, under his administration for this long, taxpayers are fed up with this. They're frustrated. We've watched our state budget explode. We've watched all of our taxes and fees go up, and Minnesota taxpayers across the state are done with funding fraud here in the state. That's the frustration that we are hearing from across the state, and as you saw in the letter today.
I would just add, in any organization, any company, anyone who oversaw the kind of failure that the chief executive of the state has overseen, those in charge would find a way to get rid of that leader. Unfortunately, what we're dealing with in Minnesota is that if Governor Walz resigns, the next person up for the job is the person who has been by his side throughout this entire failed administration as well. So it may ultimately be up to the people of Minnesota to fire Governor Walz at the ballot box in November of 2026.
And one other piece that I will definitely add to that, as you saw in the op-ed from Jim Nobles that was referenced by Leader Niska earlier, when there was a pattern of fraud, as we saw in the child care, and then it's gone on through multiple different agencies, Jim Nobles said in that article that all the state needed to do was to implement standard financial controls and oversight. That has not happened. That is why fraud has gone on unchecked for this long, for 7 years.
Minnesota House Speaker Lisa Demuth and Floor Leader Harry Niska, both Republicans, virtual news conference held Monday. The office of Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, a Democrat, putting out a statement about the alleged fraud, including at a Minnesota Child Care and Learning Center. He had strengthened oversight, including launching investigations into these specific facilities, one of which was already closed. He has hired an outside firm to audit payments to high-risk programs, shut down the Housing Stabilization Services program entirely, announced a new statewide program integrity director, and supported criminal prosecutions. Tiki Brown, the commissioner of Minnesota's Department of Children, Youth, and Families, held a virtual news conference Monday to respond to the fraud claims.
We are aware of a video that's being circulated that has gained local and national attention about child care centers in Minnesota. While we have questions about some of the methods that were used in the video, we do take the concerns that the video raises about fraud very seriously. Each of the facilities mentioned in the video has been visited at least once in the last 6 months as part of our typical licensing process. And in fact, our staff are out in the community today to visit each of these sites again so that we can look into the concerns that were raised in the video.
With more on the alleged fraud in Minnesota's public programs, joining us on the phone is Axios breaking news reporter Herb Scribner. Thanks for being with us. What is the Federal Homeland Security Department investigating in Minnesota?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of investigations into Minnesota over the years, particularly when it comes to different fraud schemes and different alleged, fraud situations that have been going on there. And right now there's a big investigation into these alleged fraud schemes tied to, government-funded child care programs in Minnesota. It was kind of stirred up by a YouTuber who alleged in a series of posts that there was massive fraud in these programs, and it caught the attention of Vice President J.D. Vance and the FBI, and now you have the Department of Homeland Security in there, basically trying to see if these child care programs are part of a broader fraud investigation and how that all plays together. So, so they're basically conducting investigations into these child care programs, these child care facilities, trying to see if there's fraud going on there, what's the status of them, and it comes amid a larger sweeping allegations of fraud in Minnesota that have dated back to before the pandemic.
Have they said how much money could be involved?
Yeah, there's been some numbers thrown out there. I know that there's some numbers. The big number that's been thrown out by the Assistant U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson when it comes to just in general, allegations of fraud against Minnesota. There's a number that's been thrown out is $9 billion in federal funds that have supported these different Minnesota-run programs. Might have been stolen. So you're talking, kind of the number that's been thrown out there is like $9 billion. And the thing with that though is that Thompson did not offer any evidence about where that $9 billion came from. And Governor Walz has also challenged those allegations. But I think there's also this broader, move to investigate these different programs, and there's not necessarily like one central number they're focusing on.
How has Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, the State Attorney General Keith Ellison responded so far?
Yeah, so Walz has defended a lot of what's been going on in the state. He has said, he was telling, different outlets that he's worked for years to crack down on the fraud within the state. Obviously, he's, him and the others are very aware of the fraud allegations and the charges that have come up. And so, he's Walz's office has specifically, said they've worked to cut down on the fraud, and they've also asked the state for more power to take aggressive action against those that might be committing these actions of fraud. And there was also dating back to this other case that happened in Minnesota back in 2019. this legislative audit was done, and it said that Walz's administration failed to rein in potential fraud in one of those cases. And, his team contended that the legal fights and lack of authority, there were some legal fights going on with some of the programs that were being tossed in the allegations. And he also said that, he didn't have the authority to really rein in that fraud that the audit said that, he wasn't working hard enough to do. So all that to say, they've been very, they've challenged the allegations. They've been kind of letting federal prosecutors know and everybody else who's, reading about this, that they've been trying to crack down on the fraud that is there. And that's kind of been the main response.
We're talking with Axios breaking news reporter Herb Scribner. There's also the issue of the sizable Somali community in Minnesota and how that's involved, their immigration status for some of them. What have the sides been saying about that?
Yeah, so you're right. That is a major point of all this, and there's some there's some ties here where Trump, President Trump, and Minnesota have had a very interesting history when it comes to the leaders of Minnesota and how they've interacted with Trump, and that includes when with President Trump's immigration crackdown. He's targeted a lot of the Somali community, and Minnesota is home to the largest population of Somali residents. And so, in November, he declared an end to the legal protections of Somalis in the state. And then in December, the DHS, said they would be targeting visa fraud in Minnesota. And that led to Trump sending ICE agents to the state. And a lot of that is because of, that all dates back to the fatal shooting of a National Guard member near the White House in November. The suspect in that shooting was from Afghanistan. But Trump began targeting kind of the Somali community directly after that, and which he's done for years. And that event kind of increased his ire, and it led to him kind of pushing for more stuff in the Minnesota community, which led to the crackdown on the Somali community there. And that's where kind of this new round of fraud has been going in, has been playing into it, because a lot of the Trump administration officials and prosecutors say that a lot of the fraud is escalated by the Somali community, and so that's where that kind of link comes in. So I was speaking to someone yesterday about this, speaking to a source about this, and they were basically saying, there's so much here, and there's so much going on between the different aspects of it, between the Somali community, the fraud allegations, the years of fraud allegations, what Walz's office has done, Trump's immigration policy. There's just so much going on here, so it's interesting to get into the weeds of it.
Axios breaking news reporter Herb Scribner. Find his articles at axios.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
On Wall Street today, the Dow down 94, NASDAQ down 55, S&P down 9. And CNBC writes, a federal judge on Tuesday rejected a claim by President Donald Trump's administration that it is legally barred from securing funding for the U.S. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, noting that a court order already bars the administration from shutting the agency down. The ruling from U.S. District Judge Amy Berman Jackson came as the CFPB faced the imminent exhaustion of funds. The Trump administration has denied the CFPB additional cash to meet expenses since taking control of the agency in February, but it has been repeatedly blocked in the courts from firing workers en masse. From CNBC, Washington Today continues in a moment.
Democracy. It isn't just an idea. It's a process shaped by leaders elected to the highest offices and entrusted to a select few with guarding its basic principles. It's where debates unfold, decisions are made, and the nation's course is charted. Democracy in real time. This is your government at work. This is C-SPAN, giving you your democracy unfiltered.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. CBS News writing, the United States on Monday announced a $2 billion pledge for UN humanitarian aid as President Trump's administration continues to slash U.S. foreign assistance and warns United Nations agencies to, quote, adapt, shrink, or die in a time of new financial realities. The money is a small fraction of what the U.S. has contributed in the past, but reflects what the administration believes is a generous amount that will maintain the United States' status as the world's largest humanitarian donor. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said on social media the new model will better share the burden of UN humanitarian work with other developed countries and will require the UN to cut bloat, remove duplication, and commit to powerful new impact, accountability, and oversight mechanisms. From the CBS News article. Today, the United Nations committee that's responsible for administrative and budgetary matters, it's called the Fifth Committee, met at the UN in New York City to discuss the UN's budget for 2026. Jeff Bartos is the U.S. ambassador to the UN for management and reform.
The United States commends the Fifth Committee for embracing common sense reform and for adopting a leaner and better prioritized 2026 regular budget. Today, we deliver a $570 million saving in our assessment compared to last year, and we reduced the UN's bloated bureaucracy by nearly 2,600 posts. These consequential reforms create a more focused, effective United Nations fit for purpose for the people it serves, one that directs its resources to core mandates and puts the United Nations firmly on the path to get back to basics. President Trump has made clear he believes the UN still has potential. Already, his guidance and encouragement have made that potential more real, illustrated by the results we have achieved here in the Fifth Committee. Today marks an important first step in our comprehensive reform efforts. As our collective resolution clearly states, reforms are not a one-time exercise. To that end, we expect ambitious and tangible reform proposals in the 2027 and 2028 budgets, including structural realignments, improved efficiency, and the elimination of duplication. We urge the Secretary General to put forward bold proposals that deliver the structural changes the United Nations urgently needs. In this budget, the General Assembly has established cost containment as a core objective for the common system and has directed the ICSC to align with the goals of UN 80. Next year's comprehensive review of UN compensation and benefits must produce significant changes, including lowering the margin to bring UN compensation in line with the U.S. civil service comparator. These common sense reforms are essential to ensure that the UN's compensation system is fair, sustainable, and respectful of the taxpayers who fund this institution. In this budget, we initiated a process to modernize the UN Joint Staff Pension Fund, a reform with the potential to reduce long-term costs dramatically while ensuring stability and responsible stewardship of beneficiaries' retirement security. This year, we approved responsible budgets for special political missions, including restructuring, consolidating, and eliminating unnecessary special envoy roles. Together, we have taken steps to ensure that SPMs remain focused, effective, and aligned to fulfill their mandates. In this budget, we reinforce the independence and effectiveness of the Office of Internal Oversight Services, including prioritizing its investigative capacity on cases that may lead to disciplinary action or significant financial recovery. As we continue to reform the UN, we expect OIOS to support our efforts to make the UN more accountable, transparent, and efficient. In this budget, we strengthen oversight of the UN's major construction and capital projects, including the renovation of conference facilities in Nairobi, ensuring these multi-million-dollar investments are managed responsibly and embrace the rapid advances in conferencing technology and services. Taken together, this budget reflects a shared commitment to make the United Nations more accountable, more disciplined, and better equipped to deliver real results. The United States looks forward to working with all delegations in the year ahead to deliver more essential, durable, and consequential reforms. Thank you.
Jeff Bartos is United States ambassador to the UN for management and reform at today's committee meeting in New York City on adoption of the UN budget for 2026. AP writes the U.S. imposed sanctions on 10 people and firms from Iran and Venezuela over allegedly contributing to Iran's drone trade and ballistics program, which the Trump administration says threatens the U.S. and its allies in the Middle East. From CNN, the Kremlin has dismissed calls to provide evidence to support its claim that Ukraine launched an attack using dozens of drones against one of Russian President Vladimir Putin's residences, but on Tuesday it repeated that the drone assault took place south of St. Petersburg, with Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov saying the alleged operation was a terrorist attack aimed at sabotaging President Trump's efforts to facilitate a peaceful settlement of the Ukrainian conflict. And from ABC News, China's foreign minister on Tuesday slammed a record U.S. arms sales to Taiwan as Beijing conducted the second day of military drills around the island it has long claimed as its own. Wang Yi, the most senior Chinese official to comment on the sale so far, also blasted the, quote, pro-independence forces in Taiwan and Japan's leaders during an end-of-the-year diplomatic event in Beijing. Again, that was from ABC News. Here's a minute of the speech by the Chinese foreign minister.
Taiwan issue is China's internal affair and is the core of China's core interests. In response to the continual provocation of the Taiwan independence forces and the U.S. large-scale arms sales to Taiwan, we will, of course, strongly oppose them and take countermeasures. This year marks the 80th anniversary of Taiwan's restoration to the motherland. Achieving complete reunification in accordance with the law and in defense of our national sovereignty and territorial integrity is our historical mission that we must accomplish. Japan, who started the war of Japanese aggression against China, has not only failed to reflect on all the crimes it committed, but its current leader has openly challenged China's territorial sovereignty, the historical conclusions of the World War II, and the post-war international order. This is something that all peace-loving countries and all people who do not wish to see tragedy repeated will never accept.
Through an interpreter, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi at a forum today in Beijing. That interpretation provided by AI via the Hindustan Times. More from the ABC News article about the U.S. arms sales. The package valued at more than $11 billion that was announced earlier this month by the State Department amounts to the largest U.S. arms sales to Taiwan. It includes missiles, drones, artillery systems, and military software. The article says the U.S. is obligated by its own laws to provide Taiwan with the means to defend itself. President Donald Trump has ramped up pressure on the self-ruled island to buy more U.S. military equipment, even suggesting Taiwan should spend up to 10% of its GDP on defense. That was from the ABC News article. This morning, C-SPAN spoke to Steve Clemons, editor-at-large with the National Interest, about Chinese military drills around Taiwan as a rehearsal for a blockade.
Well, I think there has been an escalation between Japan and China that has not received a lot of attention in the United States, though President Trump got directly involved in it, where a new prime minister, Takaichi, a female prime minister in Japan, just came in and basically began talking about Taiwan in a way that China interpreted as a way of promising an escalating of a conflict or war over Taiwan from Japan. And so it was a situation that really escalated, and China and Japan began taking very aggressive postures with each other, versus the travel of their people, the exchange of cultural issues. And it led to a call between Xi Jinping in China and President Trump, where Xi Jinping actually asked President Trump to intervene with the Japanese to get them to back off. So China's in a position right now where it's sending, a message to the world with these war games: don't mess with this topic, don't mess with us. And on top of it, I think there's a big question mark. Strategic ambiguity is really what has been Taiwan's lifeline for a long time, and that has been basically the deal between China and the U.S. We will not suborn or end or create a definitive end to Taiwan's status of autonomy, and we will at the same time not allow China to violently or forcefully take back Taiwan. And so in that kind of amorphous gray area, Taiwan has had stability. It's only when you have leaders that come in and try to create a definitive punctuation point in that equation that China or the U.S. or in this case Japan get really off the rails. And I think in this particular case, it's something where China is basically trying to show some muscle and remind the world that it has a lot of power and the ability to blockade, embargo, and take down Taiwan at some point. And I think a lot of U.S. military leaders also predict, actually, and this has been in our intelligence, or at least rumored in our intelligence, that there'll be a move by China in 2027 to try to do something more aggressive vis-a-vis Taiwan. That's very controversial in the intelligence community. Many people disagree with it, but it is out there, and many Trump administration people believe that that is part of China's intent.
Steve Clemens, editor-at-large with the national interest on C-SPAN's Washington Journal morning program this morning. It's an article from Reuters from December 26. China's foreign ministry announced sanctions targeting 10 individuals and 20 U.S. defense firms, including Boeing's St. Louis branch, over arms sales to Taiwan. This is Washington Today. AP writes that more artists have canceled scheduled performances at the Kennedy Center following the addition of President Donald Trump's name to the facility, with jazz supergroup The Cookers pulling out of a planned New Year's Eve concert, and the institution's president saying the cancellations belie the artists' unwillingness to see their music as crossing lines of political disparity. In a statement to AP, Richard Grinnell said Tuesday the last-minute cancellations prove they were always unwilling to perform for everyone, even those they disagree with politically, adding that the Kennedy Center had been flooded with inquiries from real artists willing to perform for everyone and who reject political statements in their artistry. There was no immediate word from Kennedy Center officials if the entity would pursue legal action against the group, as Grinnell said it would after musician Chuck Redd canceled a Christmas Eve performance. That was from Associated Press. Singer-songwriter Christy Lee has canceled her concert at the Kennedy Center, or Trump Kennedy Center, scheduled for January 14th after the name change. She posted a video on Monday.
Art carries meaning, and meaning carries responsibility. And when that meaning starts to feel compromised, an artist has every right to take a step back and say no. The legal threat that's being talked about right now from the Kennedy Center isn't really about contracts or damages. It's about control. It's about trying to scare someone into falling in line. You better get in line. I hope artists don't let themselves get continually bullied. I just want to send some courage, some strength. When an institution answers conscience with retaliation instead of reflection, it tells you exactly what it's become. That doesn't sit right with me. And it sure doesn't feel like the America that I was raised in.
Singer Christy Lee posting that video on Monday. She has canceled her concert at the now renamed Trump Kennedy Center in January. Theater Mania has an article. The Kennedy Center Honors, the annual honor given to individuals or groups in the performing arts since 1978, aired on CBS on December 23rd. The event was held on December 7th. According to preliminary Nielsen data, the televised event drew an average of 2.65 million viewers, its smallest audience ever, down 35% from last year's average of 4.1 million viewers. Tatiana Schlossberg, writes the New York Times, an environmental journalist and a daughter of Caroline Kennedy and granddaughter of President John F. Kennedy, whose harrowing essay about her rare and aggressive blood cancer published in the New Yorker magazine in November drew nationwide sympathy and praise for Ms. Schlossberg's courage and raw honesty, died on Tuesday. She was 35. Her death was announced in an Instagram post by the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation, signed by her family. In 2021, Tatiana Schlossberg was on C-SPAN 2's Book TV at the Boston Book Festival. It was virtual that year. Her book was titled Inconspicuous Consumption, The Environmental Impact You Don't Know You Have. She was alongside another author, Lori David.
One of the things that you do so well in the book, and something that I tried to do also, was to connect these problems of personal consumption to these sort of larger environmental impacts. And producing plastic, as Lori said, it's a byproduct of oil and natural gas, but it uses like a tremendous amount of energy, resulting in huge amounts of greenhouse gas emissions to produce. And then, of course, when it's in landfills, it doesn't degrade. So it gets into our soil and our water. And if it gets into the ocean or other parts of the environment, there are fish now and birds that are developing a taste for plastic as opposed to what they're supposed to be eating. And so I think it's, these questions around environmental impact and personal consumption can feel somewhat small, like if you're just thinking about it in terms of your own house, but it really is connected to these larger sort of patterns of consumption.
Tatiana Schlossberg on C-SPAN 2's Book TV in 2021. She has passed away at the age of 35 from blood cancer. She was the daughter of Caroline Kennedy and granddaughter of former President John F. Kennedy. The JFK Library announcing on Instagram, "Our beautiful Tatiana passed away this morning. She will always be in our hearts," and it was signed by the entire family. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. C-SPAN is now on YouTube TV. Current and new subscribers, you can get C-SPAN, C-SPAN 2, and C-SPAN 3 on YouTube TV. Find out more at tv.youtube.com. And for the latest on what's been going on in Washington, sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter, word for word, at cspan.org. Have a good night.